Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Social Flight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a great show for you this evening. Jamie Beckett is here from AOPA and EAA. You've probably seen him in a bunch of different places, and so we'll get to him in just a minute. What I'd like to do now is just start with a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, tonight's broadcast will be recorded, and you can see that on SocialFlight.com on the SocialFlight mobile app, or just go to YouTube and search for SocialFlight, one word, and that'll get you started with all of that. In addition, of course, we are here to support all of you and to support general aviation as a whole. With that in mind, I want to say we talked last week very briefly, but also send us your stories of flying, of supporting general aviation, new ratings that you or a loved one or someone else who's a friend may have just gotten. We are going to be giving away a pair of Flying Eyes glasses that you can see here from Flying Eyes, and you get to choose which type that you want. They've got aviator style, they've got the style that I just switched over to myself here of the Golden Eagle, and I'll tell you, I love these things. Twist them, turn them, do all sorts of crazy stuff, and you can't even feel them under a headset. So all you have to do is send to info, I-N-F-O, at socialflight.com, and tell us your story. We're going to choose one of you, and then you'll be able to win that prize. Also, we'll have more videos coming out on our channel. We've been doing tons of work on this project behind me. You can barely see the tail, our Mustang build here with Jake and Ben and myself working on that. We've got a bunch of videos coming out soon on that. It's just taken us a while to edit them. And we also just received our customized Best Tugs Bravo Tug for our aircraft, because we are getting ready for a big flying season with lots of adventures, and so you're going to see a lot of that also on our channel. With that, I would like to introduce Jamie Beckett. With a background that spans both the music and aviation industries, Jamie Beckett has more stories to tell than we could ever have time for in one show. But his primary mission these days is sharing the passion for general aviation with pretty much anyone who will listen or shows an interest. He can most often be found presenting at AOPA's Rusty Pilots seminars, working with flight students and guiding people through the process of starting and operating flight clubs. And we're going to certainly be able to take some questions on that. Just use the Q&A feature that you have, and we'll work that into our discussion this evening. His preferred mode of transportation is a bright yellow and black Reimagined Cessna 152, which he often refers to as his company car. Jamie holds commercial, land, and sea ratings for airplanes, as well as instrument and multi-engine instructor ratings. He's owned multiple airplanes over the course of his career, ranging from a 1963 Cessna 150 to World War II era J3 Cubs, an experimental aircam twin-engine adventure machine, as well as being an A&P mechanic with a penchant for the classics. Welcome, Jamie. How are you doing tonight?
Outstanding. I got to admit, after that bio, I'm a little bit embarrassed. I hope I measure up.
There's no way not to measure up with your resume here. So, look, we like mixing things up a little aviation, a little other history here. I'm fascinated, and I read one of your articles recently where you just casually dropped some little references to like playing with Keith Richards and being, back in a long time ago down in Greenwich Village. I want to start with your music background and then how you came to aviation, or maybe one came before the other. Fill me in on this.
Well, I'm like anybody else in this age bracket. The Beatles were on TV. They were the coolest thing in the world. And I thought playing the guitar for a living was the greatest thing that you could ever do. And as you can see from my office wall, it has stuck. There's about 30 guitars in the house, and I still play. As a matter of fact, there was a country artist, cosmic American music artist named Graham Parsons, who's from Winter Haven, where I live in Florida. There was a club here that his family operated when he was a teenager, so he had a place to play. I was one of the people who got that up and running again a few years ago, and it's back to being a viable club, pre-COVID, of course, where we'd do open mic nights and things like that, where you'd have you'd have kids that had never been on stage, terrified to get up in front of the audience, and we'd have national acts. I mean, it's just, it got into my blood, Jeff. It's just something I've always loved, and I'm lucky that I actually kind of made a little tiny bit of an impact. It was fun.
Well, you got to tell me some more about that. And I'm sure there's stories here. I'm going to start, there's a couple pictures here, and I don't even know the stories behind this. So I'm going to go and bring one of these up here. And,
Oh,
and
that's my mom and dad. My dad is holding my brother Chip. He's a veterinarian now, and I'm that little guy down on the left. I'm only like a year and a half old in this, but this was a story that was in Arizona Days and Ways magazine in 1960. My mom, well, this is kind of weird, but my first apartment was at the Arizona State University campus. My parents were students at ASU. My dad was a fighter pilot for the Air Force. My mom was in school, and they did a story about my mom. So that's where we lived. It was a place called Victory Village, and if anybody's familiar with Tempe, Arizona, it's right across the street from now. It's the Gamage Center. Dr. Gamage was the president of the college then, but that was my first public exposure. The first time my name and picture was ever in print was 1960 in Tempe, Arizona.
that's pretty impressive. And that there's the aviation connection right from the beginning with your father.
Yeah, my dad was an F-86 pilot in the Air Force, and he went on to a really brilliant career with Pan American Airlines. He did some amazing things. When Nixon went to China, he was one of the pilots that flew the press, which was a big deal, if you recall, when Nixon went to China.
Oh yeah.
He was one of the pilots on Pan Am 50, which was an around the world flight on a 747 SP that went over the poles, the North and the South Pole, and they sold tickets and people went on the whole thing. And my dad was one of the pilots, so he still holds a world record today.
Oh my God, that's impressive. And
Yeah, he did some stuff.
and one of the first pilots, obviously, to fly into China.
Yeah, he was, as a matter of fact. It was kind of funny because we knew about it as a family. It was sort of a secret. You have to get background checks. Not that it's that hard to do a background check on an 11-year-old, but we weren't supposed to talk about it. And of course, when Nixon finally went, it was a news story that there was a local guy on the trip. And I recall my principal, when I got to school that day, kind of talking to me like I had a head injury, saying, "Do you know where your father is today?" And I said, "Yeah, he's in Guam." And "No, he's in China." And I'd say, "No, he's in Guam. He's an ex-military pilot. They're not allowed to stay in China." So kind of that's I think where I learned my disrespect for authority, Jeff.
That's funny. So here's let me show another one here.
Oh, Melissa Etheridge. That's in the dressing rooms at Toad's place in New Haven, Connecticut. I was peripherally involved with the first 2 or 3 Melissa Etheridge albums, and she was playing at Toad's place, and a friend of mine was taking some promotional pictures, and she took an entire roll of pictures. That's the only one that came out. And Gail Miller was the photographer, and I still hang on to it, and I got a huge kick out of it. That was sort of the end of my performing era, just as I was getting into flying, but it was a great time. And she's amazing. She's got the loudest voice I've ever heard. I mean, she and David Johansen are the only people I know who can sing over the band without a microphone. Wow.
That's crazy. And look how young she looks in this.
Both of us. It was a while ago.
I wasn't going to say that about you.
Yeah, I think that's 89. I think that's 1989.
Wow. So there's a gap here, of course. You went from, I really like guitars, to, oh yeah, this is me and Melissa Etheridge.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
How did you go?
Like a lot of kids, I got into a few bands and that sort of thing. And I was at that age where you're getting a lot of pressure from the folks to get a real job and be respectable. And I was kind of going to college, but not really serious about it. And I ended up in a band called the Broken Hearts. And really it was Michael Mazzarella and I and the other two kind of rotated. But we ended up with a good, oh yeah, that's us. That's Michael on the left and me on the right. The guy with the guitar is Tom Biddle, and that was my guitar, and it's right there.
And
And Patrick Urell was the drummer. But I ended up in with this band, and we did quite well. I mean, we played extensively throughout the Northeast, into New York and New Jersey. Met a lot of great people. Opened for Katrina and the Waves, and national acts. We just had a great time. So of course, my college career came to an end because my band was doing well.
and so there's a couple others that are in here with this. Let me show one of these here.
Yep, Michael and I doing vocal overdubs for that album, which is still available, by the way. You can get it on iTunes. There's Bandcamp.com just re-released the original album mix, but as a download. But I can't believe, we recorded that I think in '86, and that was back in the days of vinyl, Jeff. Since then, it's been a CD, it's been a digital audio tape, it's been an MP3. I can't believe all these years later, it's still out there, and every once in a while I hear one of the songs someplace.
That's awesome. All right, so but before we switch over to aviation here, though, explain this whole Keith Richards thing, because I've read it, I saw the little name drop in your article. Fill me in on this.
Yeah, Keith's my idol. We celebrate Keith Richards' birthday at my house. As a matter of fact, my adult children are aware, and we gather on December 18th and celebrate Keith's birthday because he's just a guitar player. I have enormous respect for the guy. For years, you didn't see him on talk shows or anything. I was peripherally involved with his first solo album, Talk Is Cheap, and I ended up at the record release party by invitation, which was at the Under Acme Bar on Broadway in New York City, Lower Manhattan. And if the 17-year-old me could have realized that one day I was going to end up in a bar with Keith Richards and Iggy Pop and everybody from NRBQ and Steve Jordan and the whole Expensive Winos band, maybe I would have relaxed a little bit as a teenager. It all works out.
That's pretty crazy. All right, so somehow this all turns around and brings us to aviation. What is this?
Yeah, this is only a year after that Melissa Etheridge picture. That is at Comair in Sanford, Florida. I had started flying when I was in the band in New York. I decided that I wanted to be a pilot, but not like my dad. I didn't want to be a military pilot. I didn't want to be an airline pilot. I just wanted to have fun. I thought it would be a great way to get out of the city faster because, traffic and buses and trains, it's tough. Well, I found out I really liked it. And then during that period, the band broke up. And frankly, Jeff, starting in band and writing the material and doing that's a lot of work. But I thought, do I really want to go through all that again? I liked flying, and I seemed to be pretty good at it. So I went to Comair in Sanford, Florida. The guy on the left is Todd. He was my primary and instrument flight instructor. We're still friends. Todd Hendrickson. I met him in Orlando a year or so ago when he had a layover. He was a fantastic flight instructor, and that just did it for me. I was in Florida, which is my happy place, flying around, getting to talk to people about aviation. I lived in an apartment. All my neighbors were pilots. I went down to the airport. Everybody there was a pilot. It was very much like the music business. Everybody I dealt with was interested in what I was interested in, and that works for me.
Wow. Now, did you how'd you make that transition from like Greenwich Village and downtown Manhattan to all of a sudden, I'm up, I'm gone, I'm in Florida? Like, there's no airports last I checked downtown.
No, when I started in New York, and I'll tell you, even though my dad was a pilot, I was under the impression you could only learn to fly in the military because every pilot I knew was either a military pilot or an ex-military pilot. I've never met a civilian pilot. I was in my mid-20s. I was in Manhattan, and I went to a magazine store down in Lower Manhattan, and I found a story, and somebody was writing about learning to fly, and I had this epiphany. I realized anybody can learn to fly. So I decided I would do it. And you're right. I was living on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village, which is a very inhospitable place. There is no general aviation airport around. So I would have to take a train to another train to a bus to a long walk out to MacArthur on Islip, Long Island. And that's how it started. And I realized there that if I really wanted to do this, if this was going to turn into a career, I needed to make it a full-time endeavor. I couldn't play around with it like that. So I moved to Florida. Comair is no longer there. Now it's called L3, still in Sanford. But a guy named Jim Williams, who had been a Delta captain, started a flight school, I guess, so his kids can learn to fly. But it just grew and grew and grew. I think when I was there, we were doing something like 400 check rides a month. It was a real, yeah, it was an incredibly busy place. And I still have good friends from there. You know, my friend group from flight school, they're corporate pilots, they're freight pilots, they're airline pilots. I think I'm the only one who's a professional GA pilot, and we still stay in touch. It's been a fantastic ride. I'm so glad I went there and did this.
You're making my head explode. 400 check rides a month?
It was a really
more than 10 check rides a day.
Yeah, we had a lot of airplanes. It was a really busy place.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's fantastic. That's kind of like the idea of what's going on in my head when you think about what the production in the 70s was of all of the big GA manufacturers.
Well, and you know, it's part of the reason that where I live here in Central Florida, the Orlando FSDO does more certification of pilots than any place in the world by far. It's really the place to be. And nothing against any place else. I like Florida. I was lucky. My dad was a Floridian. My mom was a New Englander. I got to pick. But I love living here. But it really is. For GA, this is the center of the universe.
That's amazing. Wow, that's awesome. So let me show you a couple other things here, because there's a couple other really fun. I love
my
this.
First Cub. That's my 1940 Cub. And Jason Schapper from M0A.com came and flew it with me right around that time and then bought it from me. And unfortunately, he has not decided to sell it back to me. It's not exactly a point of contention, but we bring it up almost every time we're together. I kind of would like that airplane back, and I don't think he wants to let go of it. But that was a 1940 J3 Cub. And actually, I've told this story because people ask me sometimes about buying an airplane. There was a guy on my field who put that airplane up for sale. I think he was asking $28,000, which isn't bad for a Cub. Well, I wasn't shopping for an airplane, but I found out he had it. So I offered him $18,000. And he got mad and yelled at me and called me names. And I was like, hey, I'm not trying to insult you. You can sell it to somebody else for 32. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I'm just telling you, if you'll take 18,000, I'll give it to you. I'm fine. We went our separate ways. About 3 days later, he called me back and said, were you still willing to give me 18,000? Because it turns out he didn't have a pilot's license, and he had never actually registered it in his name, and his company was transferring him. He had all these reasons he had to sell it, but all these reasons it was going to be hard to sell. So I got an amazing deal on that airplane and just loved it.
Oh my God, and when was that?
6 years ago.
Wow, that's
awesome.
It's
not ancient history. That's one thing, Jeff, I do deal with people all the time. Airplanes can be very expensive. If you take your time and you look around and you network, you can do really well. My first airplane, 150, I bought it for $11,000. The guy was asking 20. I offered 10 and he countered with 11. We're done now. I've been very lucky with that sort of thing. I've never gone out of my way to take advantage of anybody. I just tell them, this is what I'm willing to pay. If you can find somebody else, it doesn't hurt my feelings. But generally, I do pretty well with that.
I have always believed, I got started in the aviation space by being so focused on helping people realize they can own aircraft. And there's a lot of people focused on You Can Fly, without a doubt. We're going to talk about the AOPA program that you do with You Can Fly. And I think owning aircraft is also more attainable than a lot of people give credit for.
It's not that much different than the music business, in the sense that if you start from a position of I can't, then you're probably right. You probably can't. But if your goal is to get up on the stage facing the other way from the other 5,000 people in the room, or to own an airplane, or to start your own business, if you believe you can and you're willing to put in the work, you probably can. But so many people just start up with the knee-jerk reaction, I can't do that. And they don't really have any reason for that. It's an assumption. Well, then you can't. But I've been very lucky. I've owned a number of aircraft, and I've really enjoyed it. And I've almost always made a little bit of money on the sale of them.
Hmm.
My most recent Cub, actually, you may think I'm a little insane. I found a Cub, a 1945 Cub, disassembled in a barn down in Arcadia, Florida. And I bought it for a great deal and gave it to a bunch of kids in a high school to rebuild, and it's theirs.
Oh my
So
God,
they can put it together. But these kids have never worked with tools. They never thought they'd have access to an airplane. The school they're in started an AOP. Well, they're using AOPA's curriculum, the STEM curriculum,
hmm
and they were able to start a flying club. Now they've got an airplane to put together, and it's not a full-blown restoration. It's just reassemble it. It'll fly, and they'll have something that, frankly, will operate for probably $20-$25 an hour.
hmm
That's not bad.
So it's interesting because you didn't mention in your most recent General Aviation News article that I was reading was about flying clubs, of course, and
Mhm.
and starting that with kids, and you didn't mention you were the donor.
Yeah, well, it, I'm very lucky that my wife realized long ago when she married a failed musician that I was probably not like the other kids and would do things a little unusual. But I actually went to look at that airplane with Mike Zajunas, who runs the Lakeland Aero Club. He's the president there, and I sit on the board of that club as well. And we were both looking at the airplane, and it was one of those great moments where he looked across the call at me and says, "If you're not buying this, I will." So, like, give me a break. I'll go talk to the guy. But yeah, it was just a great deal. And it's not like I'm real wealthy or anything, but you can get a pretty darn good deal on an airplane if you try. And I get a lot of satisfaction out of helping a bunch of kids get someplace because, I was lucky enough to have a parent in aviation,
hmm
but I didn't know anything about aviation. My dad did. I thought I did, but I didn't. If I can help somebody else get a little farther down the road, I get a lot of satisfaction from that. Life's not all about the money, Jeff. Sometimes it's just about doing something that makes life better.
Absolutely, no question about it. So let's talk for a minute. About the AOPA You Can Fly program, because one of the biggest things, of course, that you do as we get into this is being an ambassador for AOPA. What exactly does that mean, and tell me a little bit about the program.
I love this caricature of the three of us. That's on the right, that's Pat Brown, who does this job in Texas, and Kay Sundaram, who does it in Southern California, and I do it in Florida. You know, I kind of think of myself as a motivational facilitator. Whatever you're interested in aviation, if you haven't flown in 20 years, or if you want to learn to fly, you want to find out how I can buy an airplane, how can I do it more affordably? Could I start a flying club or be in a co-ownership? Whatever your issue is, I'm happy to help you. The thing that excites me most these days is AOPA actually put in the effort to create a high school STEM curriculum, and we have something like 8,000 kids today who are using that curriculum in normal public high schools. And it really has been tremendously successful. And you've got this interest in aviation. I wish I could have started younger, and I've actually written about this before. When I was 17, I was a long-haired hippie kid who was playing in a band, and the Navy recruiter came to my high school. Good high school, by the way. Candy Bushnell, who wrote Sex and the City, was in my class. And I told my geometry teacher I wanted to get out of class to go see the Navy recruiter, and she just looks at me, and long hair, and I lived on a farm. I was not an impressive looking kid. And I remember to this day, she said, "You're never going to be a pilot. I'm not letting you out of class." And that set me back for a number of years, because maybe I would have taken that route. I don't know. But you can't look at a 15-year-old kid and get a really good idea of what they're going to be 20 years later. It just doesn't work that way. So AOPA, bless their hearts, gives me the opportunity to really use whatever initiative I or Pat or Kay have at our abilities, just help people somehow make their aeronautical dreams come true. Get involved, stay involved. That's part of why flying clubs are so great. When people look at the idea of, oh man, the airplane I want's $150,000. Well, if there's 10 of you in a club, that's not that big of an investment. And now you have access to that airplane as if you were an owner, because let's face it, we don't fly the airplane 20 hours a day. It mostly sits in the hangar. So
Right.
Plus, there's the social thing, just what we're doing here, Jeff. You know, the ability to get together with people and talk and swap stories. And undoubtedly, you know things I don't know. That's going to make me a better person. So it works.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the STEM program. What you work directly with schools, and how does that work? That you actually help create these this kind of curriculum?
Well, we have a whole staff at AOPA that creates the curriculum and supports the teachers directly. I'm more of a reactionary person. I write to all the teachers through email. I'll give them calls periodically. If they want me to come be a speaker in their class, I'm happy to do it because I'm a A&P and a CFI, and I've got 30 years of experience in the business. Of course, during COVID, there's been very little going out and seeing people in person. There's been a lot of this, the web sort of thing. But you know, having that support, a lot of teachers really aren't aware, and this is not a slam against teachers, it's just people who aren't pilots or don't have a lot of familiarity don't realize that the General Aviation Airport is available to them. I actually have a piece running in General Aviation News online edition right now, came out tonight, about the fences around airports. And when Winter Haven, my town, I tried to get them to do this for years and years. And finally, the airport director and I invited the principal of the high school and her senior staff down. And they came to the airport, and we showed them what was what and how everything worked. And there was a corporate jet there, and the pilots let the principal and the staff get on. They just thought it was the greatest thing. And as they were leaving after a very successful visit, they were thanking us profusely for making the arrangements to get them onto the airport grounds. And we were both, this is a municipal facility. There's a restaurant. It's open all the time. You're allowed to come here. But people have no idea. And it does appear to be a high security area now. So very often my role dealing with high school people is teaching them, how can you get your kids involved? How can you get them on the airport? Who's the airport manager? Who would you contact at a business to arrange a visit? You know, and that just starts the process. If you get people through the fence and they start realizing, oh, I have all this available to me, it starts to work out.
Yeah. Is it generally part of just general science classes that they integrate the curriculum, or?
Sometimes. Generally, it's a case of the school sees there's potential in it, and the STEM class either prepares you ultimately for a drone license, a UAS license, or private pilot knowledge test. So you kind of go through the process, and much of the commonality of that study means those classes stay together a lot. But that really, it's just an opportunity for these kids to start seeing there's a whole other section of life you didn't think about. There's all these jobs, not just pilot, but mechanics, engineers, air traffic controllers, administrators, all sorts of people. And they're generally high-paying jobs that carry a certain amount of social status because of the responsibility that goes with them. And in many cases, you know, I'll tell people all the time, it's the difference between a six-figure income and working at the Walmart warehouse. If your aspiration is to work at the Walmart warehouse, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's one lifestyle. Whereas if your aspiration is to become an airline pilot or a mechanic for a large organization, that really can take you somewhere. I'll give you an example. Just recently, I had a friend who's an airline captain come down and talk to the high school club I work with on Thursdays and Saturdays. And kids are great because they'll ask the inappropriate question. And in all this discussion, one of the kids raises his hand and asks the captain, he says, "How much do you make?" Which an adult would never ask. And the captain told him, and their eyes got big, and he said, "And that's for 15 days a month."
Nice.
You know, that's a whole different thing. You know, they go home and they're like, I think I know what I want to do now.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I love the idea also about the airport fence, because it almost seems to me like the more security at the airport, the less friendly the airport is. And there's an airport that is out in Western Massachusetts, Northampton, that it has a big sign that says the friendliest airport in probably in Massachusetts or in New England, and it happens to have the shortest fence, which is, I think, is hilarious.
I like that a lot. Well, you know, I just get a kick out.
You have to know the code unless you're going to reach over. I don't want to get them in any trouble, but like it's like shortest fence and the friendliest airport. And so, you know, kudos to that.
Some of it's goofy, you know, and I love my airport. I live in the town I live in because I love the airport. I got a flying job there over 30 years ago. I thought this was the greatest town I've ever been in. That's why I live here. But when they fenced it, they put the flight school inside the fence. So there's a sign at the gate that says the gate code is the CTAF frequency. Well, if you're not a pilot, you don't know what that means, so it's not
I
helpful
want to
at
get
all.
started flying. What do I do?
So you literally are at the fence and you can see the flight school, but you can't get to it. Unintended
Probably
consequence.
not the best idea along something like that. Exactly. Yeah, it should be. Yeah, there's just no good answer to that one.
It was a well-intended plan, but it doesn't work at all, in my opinion, and it's probably better to go the other way.
So, like, what percentage of time do you spend now? If you're like, where's most of your time focused? Is it on training, helping new pilots, working on the STEM stuff, or working on, as you mentioned, helping people with flight clubs?
Well, I'm kind of a workaholic, so it's sort of if I'm awake, I'm working, and that
Hmm.
includes weekends and evenings. So I don't really break it down to percentages. I'm very much looking for opportunities where I reach out to people who may not know who I am. And equivalent amount of time is people reaching out to me saying, I need help with this or that.
Hmm.
And I have a great relationship, for instance, with the Fort Myers Flying Club, which has been in business for 60 years. I was not part of starting that club, but they reach out because I have resources. You work in business, you get to have a pretty thick Rolodex over time. And
Hmm.
very often it's just a case of putting the right people together. Or, I just did a Rusty Pilot presentation earlier today with my counterpart, Pat Brown. We get all kinds of interesting questions, and people are terrified to talk to the FAA. Oh no, they'll know I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's why they publish all those books and advisory circulars. They know we don't know what we're talking about. Just ask questions and read, and that's why they're there. It's okay. So a lot of what I do is sort of a dating service. I just put people together. Although my counterparts in our we'll walk you through the whole process of starting a flying club. So the FAA and the IRS will be happy. They like the way you've done it. That doesn't matter if it's for high school kids or for octogenarians or anyone in between. There's a way to do this. If you want to do a co-ownership, people often call them partnerships, but the appropriate term is co-ownership. Yeah, we can help you do that so that it's done in such a way that you don't have problems down the road.
Hmm.
If you haven't flown in 30 years, yeah, there's a program for that. If you've got a 15-year-old who's interested in getting in aviation, we have a program for that. If they have no money to learn how to fly, I can tell you where there's scholarships. Basically, my job is to be the encyclopedia, connect everybody. And I like that. I mean, it's enjoyable. It really is. It's satisfying. And this is a little goofy, but I got an email a few years ago from somebody who told me a whole big story about how he had started flying and we had flown together and all these things that had happened in his life that had gotten him out of flying. But he remembered how much fun it was to fly with me and how accomplished he felt. And he went back to it and he wanted me to know he got his license, he owned an airplane, he was doing mission trips and things. And I had no memory of him at all, Jeff. None. I had to go back to my logbook and go, oh yeah, I flew with him 5 times. That's all, just 5 times. The point of it is you can have an impact. Even on one meeting, you can have a real impact on somebody by leaving them with the impression, I can do this, and there is help. Maybe the big thing is people, I'm sure you've run into this, people outside of aviation think pilots are rich guys playing with their toys. They're very exclusive. They're in this fenced enclave. And the reality is they tend to be very friendly, blue-collar people who are more than happy to help you come in and work with them and learn how to fly. And yeah, I'll take you on a flight in my plane. People don't know that until they get inside the fence. And part of that is pilots make up less than 0.2% of the overall population, which means if you gather 100 random people, one of them used to know a pilot.
Oh God, it's amazing how small a group we are, and yet, and the fence is a problem. I mean, I think that one of the things that we need to do is figure out how do we do that, because we know everyone inside the fence, as you mentioned, we're dying to make more pilots. I mean,
Yeah.
we want more pilots, we want more aircraft owners, we want more people. I mean, it's just good all the way around. We want more companies selling products, everything. More is always better for us. It gives us an opportunity to share more and see our industry flourish, which it hasn't been growing the way that we'd want it to.
Well, I'll tell you, I've got a 15-year-old kid in the high school flying club here in town who has taken the lead on rebuilding this Cub and has just done a great job. And he's 15. He's too young to go to A&P school, but we talked about it, and he understood the on-the-job training thing. He writes down what he does every work session, and I sign it off for him after inspecting his work. He's building up time to be an A&P. He's only 15, but he already sees what he wants to do. We went flying last Saturday. He's like, this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a pilot and a mechanic. You know, if you know what you want at 15, you're way ahead of the game.
I absolutely love that, and of course we've mentioned it before. I've got one of my two boys here that just he's got 2 of his 3 exams for his A&P done. He's getting ready to take the general probably in a week, and then he's off for the oral and the practical and get that done. And tell me, how did you go about that? How did you get your A&P license?
I was actually editing a magazine at the time. Because I started writing as soon as I was a CFI. I started writing for magazines because I'm a loudmouth and I'm opinionated. And at some point, I actually was staying home. I was taking care of the kids. My wife works IT for a large corporation, and she was traveling a lot. And I mean like 27 days a month, a lot. And you can't actually leave a 2 or 3-year-old at the FBO while you go fly a lesson with a student. Someone from the state will want to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. So I was staying home with the kids, writing, editing a magazine. And I thought, you know, I don't know enough about what's under the skin to be comfortable. I have a pilot's level knowledge of the mechanics, but I don't really get what's underneath. So I actually took a bit of a sabbatical. I went to A&P school, and then I spent a year working for Tom Riley at the Warbird Museum, rebuilding B-17, did maintenance on 3 B-25s, T6s, started rebuilding the P-40. It was a remarkable experience. But that really gave me what I needed so that I could go ahead and be functional in aviation in a broader sense. And I got to admit, there's not a single certificate, there's not a single class I regret going to. It's absolutely been worthwhile. For many people, it was college. Most of my peers, you know, my sister's a lawyer, my brother's a doctor. But I'm just this idiot who got into aviation, and I like working on airplanes in the hangar. I like building them from scratch. I enjoy flying them. Not all at the same time, but I like doing all those things.
That's awesome, and obviously you pass that passion around to everything that you do. So now you wrote a story recently that was about that flying club and starting up flying clubs that are basically kind of run by kids, you know, where kids are doing that. And I'm seeing more and more of this. We had Kevin Lacey on from Airplane Repo. He's doing something like that in Texas, which is fantastic. Tell me about what you're doing, what you started there, and how this is something as a model for others to be able to do in their communities.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm shameless. I am just flat out stealing what's been done over at Lakeland Aero Club, over next to the Central Florida Aerospace Academy. I've known Mike Zidzunas, who's the president of that organization, for a number of years. Several years ago, they actually called and asked if I would be on their board of directors. It's a remarkably well-run organization. There is adult leadership, as there is in the aspiring aviators that I work with over here in Winter Haven. There's adult leadership, but the kids run the show. The kids learn responsibility, and the amazing thing is they come in that first year just like any other 13, 14-year-old kid. They're shy, and they kind of stand in the corner, and they don't know how to work with tools. But I'll tell you, one of the things that has amazed me is the people I meet in the transition you see. Sean Stoltz was a member of the Lakeland Aero Club. He went to Central Florida Aerospace Academy. And he started out as that very shy kid, really didn't look you in the eye when he talked and that sort of thing. Today, he's at Embry-Riddle working on a meteorology degree, because by the time he got out of high school, he already was a commercial pilot with a CFI. That's pretty remarkable. He was ready to go to work. His goal is to be a NOAA pilot, be a hurricane hunter. So that's why he's getting the meteorology degree. It's absolutely remarkable when you put kids in this setting and teach them incrementally how to take responsibility for their own actions and their own future. They actually do it. They're inexperienced and they're immature and they need some guidance. But if you give them the chance, they start taking the reins, kind of like this kid at my club, James, who's 15 years old and has really taken a leadership role on rebuilding an airplane. I mean, he kind of manages the other kids and lets them know what to do. He spent last week making a hardware list of what we need to put the empennage back together, literally going through the parts manual and the assembly manual, figuring out every single bolt or cotter key he would need. He's 15. This stuff's amazing, and that's what makes it worthwhile, Jeff. It is work, but that's why I'm perfectly fine making a contribution to a group like that now and then. And by the way, I should mention the AOPA thing. The You Can Fly side of AOPA, where I work, this sort of stuff, the Rusty Pilot and the flying clubs and the high schools, that's all supported by benefactors. Not a dime of anybody's dues go towards my salary or any of the work we do. So that's kind of important, and I live that life. I believe in that. So I've been very, very lucky in my life. I've been successful at music and writing and aviation, general aviation, which is pretty rare for people to make a living in those three things.
No kidding.
I'm perfectly happy to spend my time and a segment of my money to help other people do the same thing. It's that whole pay it forward thing. I really do believe in that.
So give me a quick overview, though, so we do understand what are the steps in establishing something like what you've done with with the program with kids there.
Not the hardest thing in the world. Start with a mission statement. A couple sentences of what is it you want to do, because mission creep will come in as you have turnover down the road. Basically, what you're doing from that point is you're dealing with your Secretary of State's office to file to be a nonprofit corporation, not an LLC. You want to be a nonprofit corporation. Then you'll go to, and I'm sorry to do that, you file articles of incorporation and bylaws. And it's a nominal fee with your state. And actually, if you write to me, I'll tell you what the website for your state is. Then you're going to go to the IRS and get an EIN, an employee ID number. If you've got a head injury, that can take as much as 5 minutes. You'll have it immediately off the internet. Then you can go to the bank and open a bank account, and now you're in business. If you truly are a nonprofit organization that's involved with charitable work or education, you very well may qualify to be a tax-exempt organization. I often recommend people work with a lawyer or a CPA or both in their area, because laws vary from state to state. Florida and California are very different in how they deal with this stuff.
So now you've got this entity. How do you actually get the kids, the aircraft, the tools? What do you do there?
Pizza has magical properties. It really does. If you tell people that I'm going to hold a meeting at the airport conference room or in a hangar to talk about Flying Club, you will be alone. But if you tell people I'm having a bunch of pizzas and soda brought in, and we're going to meet down at the airport, we're going to talk about getting an airplane, 25 people will show up. Easy. And you start talking about, that's all we did here. We invited all the parents and kids down. We got some volunteer pilots who would bring their airplanes out so people could look at them. And we just invited people out, bought a bunch of pizzas, and I think we had 50, 60 families came out the first time.
Oh my God, wow.
It was absolutely great. You'd be surprised if you can let people know, and kids communicate wonderfully. I mean, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that, you let kids know, they'll share the information. They're just looking for an opportunity, and they have no idea how to get through that fence. Once you tell them there's a way to do it and that there's a slice of pizza with their name on it on the other side, they're showing up.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It really does work.
You have a way of attracting aircraft. You mentioned that when all of a sudden you walked across this J3 Cub project. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that was just a weird thing. In that case, it was barnstormers.com. I had a 1949 PA-16 Clipper project, but I mean, it's a total restoration project. And I was willing to give that to the kids, but that was going to be years of work. So I started looking around and I found one on Barnstormers. And, you know, aviation is such a small world. I found this on Barnstormers, and Mike from Lakeland and I went down and looked at it. Well, it had come to Florida from Texas 3 years ago. So I started doing a little bit of research on it. After I agreed to buy it, we came to terms on a price. Turns out it had spent its entire life in Texas. In February 1946, it left Pennsylvania, went to Texas. And my partner in Texas, Pat Brown, knows the family that owned it. It had been converted to a tricycle gear in the 60s, and it stayed a tricycle gear into the 90s. The woman's family who used to own it sent me a picture of it. And I got to tell you, tricycle gear Cub, the ugliest airplane ever made. I mean, it's just hideous looking. Thank goodness it got converted back. But yeah, I mean, there are, and you know, the first person that ever mentioned this to me, believe it or not, was Mark Baker. It was the whole concept behind the yellow and black 152 I fly. There are thousands and thousands of airframes out there that are relatively inexpensive. You know, they've not been taken good care of. Maybe it's just sitting on the ramp. Well, that's like that first 150 I bought. You know, I got it for $11,000. I put a couple thousand more into it. It's still flying with a flight school someplace. I sold it, and it's done phenomenally well. You don't have to spend six figures to get an airplane that you can work with. And I was just talking to the kids down at the club, because a couple of them are in flight training, and they're wondering what they're going to do afterwards. And of course, they've got the Cub to fly. But I was telling them, you know, it seems to you guys like a $20,000 airplane. There's no way you'd ever buy it, but there's 15 of you. 20,000 divided by 15, that's McDonald's and grocery store stock and shelves money. You guys could come up with that. You could do that. And they've never thought of it. It's the creativity of realizing I don't have to have all the money. I have to have a bunch of people who have that money. We're not all going to fly it every day. And as you know, if I buy a $20,000 150 and I fly it for 300 hours and I go to sell it, I'm probably selling it for about what I bought it for. It's not going to depreciate much more. So you paid for gas and oil and some maintenance. And if you learn to do the maintenance yourself, you got an education for free.
Now, do you think, like, when you go by airports and you see things like the classic, you know, plane in the weeds that's got flat tires or something that's sitting there putting dents into the asphalt for years, are those usually good targets for people to start thinking about? You know, maybe this is a project for a group.
Yeah, they are for me. As a matter of fact, there's a Cessna 150, a 1960 Cessna 150 on the ramp right in front of the kids' hangar, and it's been sitting there for a year. And if you go to the FAA aircraft registry, which you can get to on the web, and put in the N number, it'll tell you who the owner is. Well, in this case, the owner is in Montana. So the kids decided, we're going to write to him and see if he'll sell us the airplane. You know, maybe he will, maybe he won't. But that process of learning how to do your research, learning how to create a plan of action and follow through on it, that's got real value. But, you know, one of the things people maybe aren't aware of, if there's an airplane that's truly abandoned on the airport and nobody's paid tie down on it for 2 years, the airport can sell it. They're allowed to. And very often they just want their money back. They've been giving up this space. Sometimes you can get, no, it's going to need restoration. It's going to need some work, but still, that can be a very inexpensive way to get an aircraft.
Right. Do you find that you're able to kind of get over many of the costs with sweat equity, or the parts themselves and the things that you can't do tend to be a big challenge?
Well, even, you know, if you own an airplane and you have to go do the annual, an owner-assisted annual is a great idea. First of all, why pay the shop $95 an hour for a kid to go remove the inspection plates in the interior? Learn how to do that yourself. 95?
Where do you live?
Central Florida. Yeah, it's still 1952 here. But yeah, I mean, it's expensive, and that's a few hours of work to take that stuff off and put it back on. Do it yourself. You learn an enormous amount about the airplane. Go through the inspection with the A&P or the IA doing it. You learn a lot, and you can save sometimes thousands of dollars by going through that, and there's a certain amount of work you're allowed to do yourself. So that's the kind of thing that sweat equity, that willingness to put in a little bit of time can save you a ton of money. You're allowed to do your own oil changes.
Yep, of course.
Go ahead and learn how to do it.
Yep, absolutely. We've got a show coming up on that we're going to talk about. So I agree with that completely. It makes a lot of sense to be able to do as much sweat equity as possible. Do you find that logbooks are sometimes a challenge when you're looking at some of those planes?
Incomplete? Is that what you were saying? They don't
Find
have
that,
everything?
that their existence entirely or incomplete?
I'll tell you, I bought a 172 once, and it was a good plane. I liked it. I enjoyed it very much. But there was nothing in the logs about any major damage. And when I went and pulled the reports on it, it turned out it had been run over at 5,000 feet by a twin otter and scrapped. But there's nothing in the logs about that. So that's not at all uncommon. When people, it's kind of why I discount the term no damage history. You don't know. That's something that old. There are things that happen and people just don't write it down, so nobody knows. And I'm not saying that's right, but that's real. It happens.
Right.
So you're looking at the actual condition of the aircraft as you see it. What's it really like? And you know, if an airplane's got, you know, people think, oh wow, there's only 300 hours on this engine. Well, that might be good, but is that 300 hours over the last 15 years? That's not good. So you've got to kind of weigh it all. But yeah, logs are notoriously incomplete in my experience. But that doesn't really sway me.
Would you ever touch an aircraft? Would you ever touch a barn find or something that didn't have logs?
Yeah, I would. If the price was right and if it was complete enough, I would get with the maintenance guy from the FAA, from my local FSDO, and I'd tell him, what do you want to see as we put this back together? I'd develop a relationship with them. Don't be afraid of the feds. They're not mean people. They're just like us. They like airplanes. But just be upfront. Hey, I found this aircraft. It has no logs. I think I know how to bring it back to life, but I'd like your advice. How do you want to see it done? And then just do that. It's not that tough.
Makes sense, definitely. Well, getting back to your day-to-day stuff that you are doing right now, we've got some more kind of like images of flying. So tell me a little bit more about the flying that you're doing these days and some of the things you're doing to get people more involved.
That is Jonathan Gauthier. He is a junior at Winter Haven High School, and he's the president of the Flying Club for kids. He's the student president. He attends the board meetings. He knows what's going on financially. He just got the James C. Race Scholarship and is starting his flight training. And he smiles like that all the time.
That's awesome.
He's absolutely thrilled to be doing this. He's learning management skills as he works with kids in the club, which is not something that teenagers are normally taught. But you know, we try to be honest with kids. Management skills are important, and they're not inherent to anybody. You have to learn to do that. And he's doing a great job. So that was the first time Jonathan and I flew together. That is my wife and two daughters. I also have a son who lives in New York City, and I believe that is Mark Baker's amphibious Super Cub. He kept it here a couple times. Actually, you might get a kick out of this. I ran that airplane out of fuel once in the air, which is not something I'm
Mark Baker's Super Cub, amphibious Super Cub, out of gas.
Yes,
and
I
you want
did.
this on recorded? You want us to be talking about this?
It was actually, well, it's funny now, but I talked to a mechanic who worked on it, and I talked to a pilot who had a lot of time flying it, and I asked, is there anything different about this Super Cub? Anything I need to know? And they said, no, it's just pretty much a vanilla Super Cub. So I went down and I did my pre-flight, and everything looks good, and it was low on fuel. You know, you've got those glass tubes inside. So I had the tanks filled up, put it on the right main tank, and I go off to fly. And I took a kid from the FBO, because why go by yourself? So I took a kid from the FBO, and as soon as we get to a couple hundred feet, I let him fly. And he was just having a great time, and he did a really good job. And we're coming back into the pattern, and just about where we would turn base, the engine just goes, and I'm like, what is going on? I have tons of fuel. Everything's great. I was unaware there's a third fuel tank. There's an auxiliary fuel tank, and the switch is back here out of my eye line. So I didn't realize. I thought I was flying on the right main tank. I was actually flying on a 9-gallon auxiliary tank. So since I was headed downhill anyway, I switched over to the left tank, and the engine came back. But apparently it's happened to a couple people. It's kind of funny. My passenger, I was really worried because he was so noticeably scared when that happened, and justifiably so. And I went to see him the next day just to make sure he's okay. and he was a student pilot. And he said, no, no, that was great. I talked to some people and they said, that was perfect because I experienced my first emergency and I wasn't the pilot. I love that.
And no visit from the FAA to give you a little ride or anything like that?
No, I mean, in all honesty, I've actually been one of the counselors on a thing like that. There was an incident a few years ago where an instrument student had run into a fuel pump with the wing of the airplane and didn't tell the instructor, and they went and flew. A DPE here counseled the student. I counseled the instructor. The FAA really is the kindler and gentler FAA. They want to know. They want to be aware that you know what you did wrong and you understand how to fix it and you take responsibility for it. And that's why I tell the story. I've made mistakes. I've done dumb stuff in airplanes, not because I didn't care or I was being careless, just I was unaware of something. There's nothing wrong with admitting I made a mistake and it was totally my mistake. I should have known there was that third tank, but I didn't. And luckily I was able to sort it out before it got really ugly. But I think it's actually valuable to acknowledge to people, I'm nothing special. I'm a safe pilot, but I'm not Sean Tucker. I'm just doing the best I can, and I try to be safe. And when I make a mistake, I tell people. It's part of the teaching process.
Makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Got a couple more here, I think, to share.
It's my buddy Brandon. Brandon actually works for the city of Winter Haven. And he is on the board of the Aspiring Aviators Aero Club. He is not a pilot. We have been flying together, but he actually has his own nonprofit that helps kids using sports as a metaphor for how to get ahead in life. And it's really valuable having him on the board. We're good buddies, and I look forward to COVID being over so he can come back over the house and hang out.
That's awesome.
That's my oldest daughter, Nikki, and you can't see a whole lot of that plane. That is an air cam.
That's what I was going to ask you about next. I'll tell you right now, just from the fact you look like you're hanging out in the breeze, that's an air cam. Tell me about the air cam.
Well, that's a pretty wild one. I love it. My dad built that airplane, and he got it all done, got it signed off, and unfortunately had an accident, was killed before he ever got to fly it. Oh. So it came to me because I was the only member of the family who has any involvement with aviation. It was partially disassembled, and it was in Connecticut, and it was January. So I had to hire somebody to put it together and ferry it down here because I just didn't have enough time. But I had it for a year. It was an absolutely remarkable airplane. I got to fly my wife and kids in it, and I did a whole lot of rides with people. There's actually a great video, or I think it's a great video on YouTube. I think it's like Amanda Flies or something like that. I'd have to look it up. But there's a woman, a friend of mine, who is terrified of flying. I took her husband flying. He loved it. And she's like, nope, we're not doing that. I got her into the back of the air cam, and it's great because as we taxi out, she's doing deep breathing. She's so nervous. I mean, she's just really uncomfortable. She was so brave, deciding she's going to try this. And the moment the wheels break ground, she's like, woo! She loved it. We went and flew and landed on grass strips and visited friends. And that plane was fantastic, and it is now in Colorado. I believe it's got an enclosure on it now for cold weather, and that was a terrific, terrific airplane. And I'm really glad my dad's airplane actually got to fly and go bring happiness to other people.
That's awesome. What a wonderful plane. I'll tell you, I love that. And then we got one last shot here.
That's the 1940 Cub, and the kid up front is Austin Baranteri. I couldn't be prouder of Austin. He went to Central Florida Aerospace Academy. I met him when he was just a kid. He kind of was a peripheral member of a flying club I was in. He and his dad. He's a super smart kid. He's now working as an AMP over in Lakeland. He's finishing up his college degree. That kid's going to be something. And he's also a regular contributor to the high school flying club here. He comes over because he works in a maintenance shop. He's absolutely great at guiding the kids because he's not quite as elderly as I am. They tune into somebody he just turned 20. They tune into somebody that age a little bit better. He's just a fantastic guy and a great example of what can happen if you take that teenager who's just got an interest in aviation but no background, doesn't really know where to go. If you shepherd them along and give them a little help and provide some opportunities for them to take advantage of, things happen. He's a private pilot and an A&P, and I just couldn't be prouder of him.
That's absolutely awesome. Well, wonderful. Well, Jamie, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to talk to us about all the work that you're doing, your background, everything in general aviation. Jason Shepard, if you're listening, Jamie wants his airplane back.
Yes, I do.
That Cub.
Thank you for being on my side, Jeff.
Absolutely. He's got enough planes over there. Maybe we can build a campaign, have a little little signature thing. We'll get that back.
I didn't even do a timeshare deal with him. I don't need full ownership.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for taking time out to join me this evening, join all of us and let us listen to your story. And I really do sincerely appreciate all of the work that you're doing to support general aviation through AOPA, through through all the work, through the general aviation news columns that you write, everything. I always look forward to reading your columns every time they come up, and I'd encourage everyone else to do the same. And again, thank all of you for taking time out of your evening to join us here on SocialFlight Live. And so we will be back next Tuesday, March 23rd, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, with astronaut and star of Into America's Wild, John Harrington. He's the first Native American astronaut, has a fantastic story and a wonderful movie coming out along with Ariel Tweedo. It's really fascinating. We're following that up on March 30th, Tuesday, March 30th, with Brian Turner, self-proclaimed world's greatest pilot and star of Just Plain Silly. So that should be an awful lot of fun. And then we're going to go behind the scenes at EAA's museum with EAA's Chris Henry on April 6th. Again, until next time, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate you taking the time this evening.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
You are very welcome. I wish you all blue skies.